friends, welcome to Words, where we talk about the stories that define us and why they work so well. My name's Elise James and I'm so glad you could be with us. The Stella Prize was just announced this week and people are all in a flurry about the exciting news that Sarah Holland-Batt has won the 2023 Stella Prize with her book of poetry, The Jaguar. It is really, truly a beautiful work. In honor of this wonderful week, this is a special tribute book stack to the Stella Prize. So a brief history on the Stella. Its inaugural year was 2013, so this is its 10th year anniversary. Hooray! It was modelled on the Bailey's Prize, which is originally known as the Orange Prize for Fiction in the UK, which honours specifically women. The reason why the Stella Prize came about: Miles Franklin is one of Australia's gem literary authors. She wrote My Brilliant Career, which is an Australian classic, and the Miles Franklin Literary Award is Australia's top literary award. It's a national award and it's highly recognised. However, women, authors, publishers, editors, people in the bookie industry were a bit disillusioned by how few women were represented in the Miles Franklin Literary Award, which is surprising considering it was named after a female author. So they decided to start the Stella Prize, and Miles Franklin's first name is Stella. Stella Maria Sarah Miles Franklin. And so this prize is also named after the wonderful Miles Franklin, taking her first name, representing all that is bright and starry and wonderful about our women literary authors. These authors in this stack right now who have either won the prize or been nominated for the prize. This isn't a comprehensive review of the prize itself, just a look through my book stack at the authors that I have within reach. Starting in chronological order, I have Burial Rites by Hannah Kent. Now this is a book I mentioned in my previous book stack when I spoke about Hannah Kent's most recent release, Devotion, which is a stunning novel. I recommend it to you. Burial Rites was her debut, and it's about a woman in Iceland who was accused of murder and actually was on death row, and it's about her experience, her story, and it's incredibly character driven, beautifully evocative of the Icelandic landscape. And Hannah Kent was known in the Melbourne literary scene, but this book really made her a national treasure. 3 books in, she is a classic already. Now, it didn't win the Stella Prize that year, but it was shortlisted, and for very good reason. Highly atmospheric, beautifully lyrical, with elements of the darkness of humanity, but also the lightness. Well worth a read. The next book I have is The Strays by Emily Bitto. Also released another novel in the last couple of years called Wild Abandon, and it was in my book stack from the first episode. So Wild Abandon is set in America. It's quite a different novel, different voice, different context, different subject matter, but The Strays was her debut. Again, another really strong breakout novel. And The Strays is actually set amongst the Heidi community in Melbourne back in the kind of modernist era of art, 30s, 40s, 50s, and the community that developed around that art scene, and it's based on some kind of rumors about scandals and different things that kind of happened in that community at the time. So a very interesting novel based on Australian history. The Strays actually won the Stella Prize in 2015. Moving on to 2016, we have Charlotte Wood's The Natural Way of Things. Another debut novel, and Charlotte Wood has released other novels, and I know that one is coming out very soon. She's also written a bunch of articles, as have most of these authors, for some of the top periodicals and the top newspapers in Australia, so well worth a look. She has a lot of really interesting things to say about the role of literature in our lives, in society. A recent article, I think with The Guardian, about humour, which was really captivating and quite poignant, especially during the time of COVID. So this was long before COVID, 2016. Quite a fascinating novel because it's speculative fiction, it's dystopian. It's actually set amongst a group of female prisoners, and it's their whole experience being in that penitentiary, and we find out a bit more about the world. I really don't want to spoil it. There's so much fascinating stuff that happens through this novel, and it's quite confrontational and provocative as well. 2016 winner and a lot of fun to read. Now, Michelle de Kretser. This novel wasn't actually nominated for the Stella Prize, but Michelle de Kretser was nominated for the Stella Prize in 2018 with her novel The Life to Come. Now, that year, Alexis Wright won with Tracker, and Tracker is phenomenal. A really beautiful portrait of a famous Indigenous Australian, a rawness that is very Alexis Wright, and so a well-deserved winner, and obviously a tough competition for that year. So Michelle de Kretser didn't win that prize. However, she's probably one of the most well-known, prolific Australian female authors. She has written several wonderfully literary novels, starting with The Rose Grower. Some of her novels intersect, they're all unique, and this one, Scary Monsters, was the most recent released last year, and I had the wonderful privilege of being able to sit in on a lecture with Michelle de Kretser when she spoke about her process and about her way of constructing this novel. It's actually two novellas, and they're back to back, and there are no instructions about which one comes first or even how they interrelate. She very deliberately did this as a way of handing off to the reader how they might interpret it, how they might decide to read it, how they might understand how these stories intersect and what they are saying. And look at this spine, it's really cool too. So kind of fun. I really love it. So she's played a bit with form here, obviously, and done it to great effect because they're actually really quite different. And this one, in my edition, is about Lily, who is an Asian immigrant who is now working in 1980s France, in Paris, and it's about an encounter that she has with a man who lives in her apartment building. And one thing I will say about Michelle de Kretser is she manages to tell these really lyrical, beautiful stories with an undertone of tension and something interesting happening. Even if there's a brightness to the tone, you still get this kind of creepy feeling that something else is going on, and she does it so brilliantly in both of these novellas because there is this impending sense of a culmination of events that won't necessarily be good. Now the other side is about Lyle. Lyle is a businessman in the near future, so this is actually a bit of a dystopian speculative take as well. So he works for a mysterious Australian government department. He's also an Asian immigrant, he's a bit older, he's got a family, and once again we get this kind of sense that things are kind of not quite right and something's happening, something's being hinted at. Now Michelle de Kretser herself is an Asian immigrant to Australia, and so this book is also very much about the immigrant experience, and specifically the Asian immigrant experience and the scary monsters that exist not under our beds but maybe in the society around us and maybe even inside us. And I should say she has won several other awards, including the Miles Franklin Award, another wonderful shortlist for the Stella Prize back in 2018. And in fact there are so many authors and books that I could mention, and I do suggest that you go on and have a look at past winners, especially if you're not familiar with the female Australian literary authors. There are so many out there. This prize has really been able to bring to the fore those voices and the stories that they're telling, which are often really pertinent to Australian society, but also the world as a whole, and especially the female voice and the female representation. It's a wonderful prize, and I think that our culture as a nation is better for it. And one thing I do want to say about the Stella Prize is that it is open to female authors in all genres, non-fiction, fiction, and poetry. That is so exciting because for 2 years in a row now, the Stella Prize has actually been won by female poets. Usually we think of literary prizes as going to the big novels. Well, poetry, it is telling us, is as significant in terms of the commentary that it's making on our society and what it has to offer us as a literary novel. And I think we've all known that forever, but it takes some reminding that sometimes delving into poetry just as enriching and rewarding as a good, solid novel. That is absolutely the case with these two wonderful authors. I happened to meet both of them at the Byron Writers Festival last year in 2022. The nicest, most generous, intelligent, sophisticated women, and I was able to see them both reading excerpts from their books, and I mentioned to them how brilliant it was to hear their voices reading this poetry aloud, and they're actually both being made into audiobooks. So if you're one of those people who prefers to hear poetry as it's spoken, because often poetry is quite performative and the rhythms and the nuance of it really come through in the author's voice, then I recommend that you go and check out the audiobooks for both of these books and just soak in the language, the imagery, the style, and the originality of these two brilliant female authors. So last year, Last year, the Stella Prize was won by Evelyn Araluen for Drop Bear, and it's won, as you can see, a bunch of awards. And this is cool too, because I've actually, you know, I had to. Oh. Evelyn Araluen is a First Nations author, and a lot of these poems really speak to her experience in that sphere, are highly valuable and really important stuff for us to be reading and thinking about and considering, and presented in such beautiful, beautiful work. I just want to mention also that Evelyn Araluen is the editor of Overland, which is an Australian literary journal. Overland tends to be a little bit more modern, cutting edge, open to some younger or more emerging voices as well as established voices. It publishes a lot of pieces that you might not read in some of the other Australian literary journals. And so if you want to be on the cutting edge of Australian voices, Overland is really the journal for you. And at the moment, it is edited by Evelyn Araluen, career artist, a career wordsmith, and a well-deserved win last year with her poetry collection, Drop Bear. So out of respect for her work, I really highly recommend you just looking up her, reading her own stuff in her own voice. I think that's really important. Which brings us to this year's Stella Prize winner, Sarah Holland-Batt with The Jaguar. So another great thing about the lecture with Michelle de Kretzer that I was part of last year is that she was interviewed by Sarah Holland-Batt when she spoke about scary monsters. And then on another lecture, I got to see Sarah Holland-Batt talk about her own work. So I've had the wonderful opportunity of seeing her in both modes, as both an interviewer and as an author. And can I say, she's got to be one of the best interviewers I've ever seen. She was knowledgeable, she asked insightful, revealing, compelling questions, and she was a delight both times. Now, Sarah Holland-Batt wears many hats, and she is a stalwart of the Australian literary community. She's a professor at the Queensland University of Technology. She's edited for quite a number of Australian literary periodicals as well. And just like Evelyn Araluen was editor of Overland, Sarah Holland-Batt has been editor of the Australian Book Review for quite a while as well. So she has been around as both a critical and a creative voice in the Australian literary scene. And I love that the Griffith Review, which is right up there with the Australian Book Review, is kind of like our top-notch literary periodicals, along with the monthly and the quarterly, and a few others as well, and Meanjin, and you've got the Westerly as well. There's quite a number of wonderful Australian literary periodicals, but Griffith Review was actually founded by Griffith University, and Meanjin actually came from Brisbane, because Meanjin is the Aboriginal land country on which Brisbane now sits. And so we've got these two wonderful literary periodicals associated with Brisbane, and also now Sarah Holland-Batt. And we've also got UQP, the University of Queensland Press, that has published a number of breakthrough Australian works. I'm from Brisbane, and I love that Brisbane has such a significant role to play in Australia's literary scene. And thank you, Sarah Holland-Batt, for making that just a little bit more awesome. Again, I had the wonderful privilege of meeting Sarah Holland-Batt in person at the Byron Writers Festival. So yeah, a little fangirl moment. Thanks, Sarah. Once again, get the audiobook, because it's well worth hearing these poems in Sarah's voice. And these poems are so beautiful and articulate, and they speak to the experience of her father. And both Drop Bear by Evelyn Araluen and The Jaguar by Sarah Holland-Batt are both speaking to significant experiences that are fairly underrepresented. So they're doing the work of activists, but through poetry, which, you know, I guess is not really surprising. Poetry has always been fairly groundbreaking, confronting in its subject matter. It's one of the vehicles for conveying strong ideas in a beautiful, artistic, sometimes very subtle way. And both of these women are doing exactly that, and in different spheres. One of the poems that Sarah spoke about in the lecture, it's actually the first poem in this volume, and it's called My Father as a Giant Koi. And it's an extended metaphor about her father and the giant koi that glides deep in the murky darkness of his home, about the complexity of the relationship between Sarah and her father, and the things that connect them and the things that are kind of keeping them distant, witnessing his experience, and it's very emotive, it's very evocative without being manipulative. So it's very powerfully written. So both of them using those lovely poetic techniques to balance the fluency of their language and the fluency of their lines with the power of their imagery, and both unique but significant in their role in Australian literature today. So thank you both so much. Stella Prize, well worth a look. If you don't have much experience in the Australian poetry scene, then these 2 volumes are an excellent place to start. And then if you want to go further into exploring female literature in Australia, you could do no better than to look through the shortlisted and prize-winning authors for the Stella Prize over the last 10 years. So thank you to all the authors who have been part of the Stella Prize and the people who were involved in establishing it and keeping it running and judging it year after year, because you are doing something wonderful for Australian culture and for female voices and marginalised voices and important voices. Thank you all so much. This has been another episode of Words. My name is Elise James. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe and follow us on our socials, and feel free to comment below, and I'll see you next time. Bye. Hang on. I'll be right with you.